Welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm your moderator for this evening. With me, I have Katie, who will be introducing herself momentarily, and we make up a very small part of the Inspira Advantage team. We have a lot to chat with you about tonight, so we'll really be covering. This is a pretty comprehensive webinar. We'll be covering how to build your brand with your personal statement and what that looks like. Before I give you a brief overview of the details. Just a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, as mentioned, this webinar is recorded, so you will receive a recording in your inbox within a day or two. So if you do have to step out or you would like to go back and maybe add to your notes or you have additional questions, you'll have access to that as well. In terms of how long we're looking at running tonight's discussion, the goal is 1 hour. So we'll be going over quite a few topics. So first and foremost, figuring out your personal brand and what that looks like, how to write like you mean it and what that entails. We'll talk about how to tell your story and how to avoid missteps. Additionally, we love to do Q&A. So towards the end of the webinar, we always leave some time where you're able to ask those questions, whether you want to unmute yourself or if you want to use the chat, both options will be available. And ask Katie those kind of questions, right? Whether it be about the personal statement, personal narratives, brand building, MCAT, interviews, which I know Katie is a specialist at, amongst other things. So we definitely want to make that available to you as well. Before I pass it on to Katie, just want to take a quick moment to introduce ourselves. As mentioned, we're Inspira Advantage. We're a globally recognized admissions consulting and test prep firm with over 16 years of experience. We specialize in helping students gain entry into the top graduate healthcare programs, everything from medicine to nursing, all with a 94% acceptance rate, something we're incredibly proud of. We believe in starting early, which is why we offer something called pre-health advising for college freshmen. I don't know if we have any college freshmen in this session tonight, but what do we do? How do we help our students? We help students by building a tailored academic timeline, including course selection and GPA strategy, find impactful experiences like researching, shadowing, clinical, non-clinical volunteering, extracurriculars, leadership roles, and we really help make their application stand out from the rest with a stellar personal statement and interview prep. This allows us to lay a strong foundation to help our applicants differentiate themselves from others and leave that lasting impression. In addition, we have tutors who provide one-on-one test prep for MCAT, DAT, and GRE. We begin with diagnostic tests, then we move into custom study plans, interim progress tracking, and then our students do see a score increase, which is nice. And on average, that's 15 points on the MCAT with 45 plus hours of tutoring. And then our 60-hour program actually has a score guarantee of 515 for the MCAT, 21 for the DAT, and then 320 for the GRE. Once we've gone through all of this and it's time to apply, we have something called an all-inclusive application program, which offers unlimited support through the entire application cycle. So this includes crafting a personalized narrative in school lists, perfecting personal statements and secondary essays with unlimited edits, and I think that's really important to have, providing interview preps, scholarship guidance, and then waitlist strategy as well. Basically, we are with our students until they receive our acceptance. Our goal is very clear. It's to create the most competitive candidates and applications, ensuring our students shine from the never-ending and very competitive admissions landscape. Want to throw this out there, but if you'd like to know a little bit more about us, we do offer personalized consultations via video, phone, or email. No matter where you are in your application process, we'd love to chat with you, and we want to make sure that if you need any sort of support outside of this webinar, we'd love to be there for you. So definitely take advantage of that as well. Katie, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then you can take it from here.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea.
You're very welcome.
I'm Katie. I am a PGY4, so I'm in my 4th of 6 years at University of Wisconsin, training in plastic and reconstructive surgery here. In my kind of pre-med days, I also had quite a background in educational content, writing and teaching specifically. So that's kind of my other background apart from medicine. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University for medical school. And like I said, and now I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin for residency, before taking my plastic surgery boards in 2 years. So I actually love helping clients, but also just talking about personal statements and how to optimize, especially coming from I was, of course, on the medical school admissions board, and I am now currently on the residency admissions committee as well for plastic surgery. So coming from the reviewer side of things, giving whatever tips I can. So please, if you guys think of any questions during the talk, I'll try and keep it on the shortish side so we can talk more at the end. But if you have any questions during the talk, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. And with that, I'll just get started. Thanks for having me. So, okay, how to write a good personal statement is going to be the general topic of tonight. I'm going to try and give all the tips and tricks that I have and advice that I have. Of course, there is more than one correct way to write a personal statement. These are just my preferences and things that I've learned over the years of helping clients and going through the process myself and reviewing applicants. So just because I say it doesn't make it, absolute fact, but these are just my tips and my experiences. So the first thing that really will help you kind of conceptualize how to write a good personal statement is figuring out this personal brand. And everyone has one. You may not have identified it yet. And that is really the first kind of pivotal step in writing a good personal statement, is figuring out what makes you different from other applicants. Because obviously, basically all applicants that are applying to medical school, it takes a lot of money and time and effort just to do so. They're all strong applicants that care about helping people and have a passion for medicine. And so what makes you different? And really the answer to that is your story, right? No one has a story like yours. No one has the experiences that you have. They might have similar things. They might have, similar volunteer or research opportunities or whatever it may be, but no one has your story. And so figuring out kind of the steps through your narrative and your story, what experiences you've had that have shaped your personal worldview, and how that's impacted and influenced your values and your motivations to go into medicine. These are things that we're trying to convey on a personal statement. So the first step is really to identify that story, identify what makes you different, identify not just, I had a family member that had a health event and being in that kind of context made me interested, and then I'm pre-med now. So there's more to it. And that's what we're trying to get at with this personal statement. And we're trying to help admissions committees understand you better. And so, like I said, more than just your passion for medicine, you can just assume that everyone that's applying with you has that same passion. And so we need kind of the step above that or the step past that to really understand you better as an applicant. So very, very important to me. This is a little bit of a pedestal that I get on, which I will get on a few tonight because this is something I love talking about. But very important is that your personal statement should absolutely not be a retelling of your application or your CV. It really should not be just a listing of your experiences or your qualifications or your leadership activities. It really shouldn't be that. In my mind, your personal statement is a story or a narrative, which you'll hear a bunch of times tonight. And that doesn't mean it has to be, some poetic thing, but it really should help us kind of almost in chronologic order understand the sequence of events that led you to this point of applying for medical school and to this point of your realization that medicine is for you. And so it really should not be just a retelling of things that you've done that, hit the check boxes for applying to medical school. So really once you've identified, what story it is that's most meaningful to you or that's going to come across clearly for admissions committees, it's trying to figure out how to convey that in a way that is authentic and genuine. Some advice that I've received when I was applying for residency, actually, about personal statements that I like to retell because it kind of made sense to me, is that about 90% of the personal statements that we review as admissions committee, reviewers or admissions committee members, about 90% of those personal statements are just fine. They don't really do anything for your application. They are kind of generic. They sound very similar to everyone else's. They list some characteristics that would make you a good student and a good physician, but they really don't move the needle one way or the other. They're just fine. And honestly, that's okay. Like I said, 90% of them are that, and lots of people get into medical school, so that's okay. 5% are red flags. 5% of them are say something sketchy or controversial or something that makes me really go, wait a second, I don't know if this person's a good fit. And then 5%, which you won't be in. And then 5% are really outstanding personal statements that make me, once I've read that, almost regardless of their application, makes me want to meet that person and makes me, as an admissions committee reviewer, want to advocate that that person needs an interview because we really need to meet this person. And really the difference between the 90% of just fine personal statements and the 5% of outstanding, I need to meet him or her, is the authenticity of the personal statement. So really what I mean by the authenticity is that that story is yours. I have not heard it before. And it conveys, it helps me understand the context of how you got here. And not just specifically, not just what you think I want to hear as a reviewer, because it's really quite apparent when you are just writing to, this is what I think a reviewer would want to hear about an applicant. That does come up quite a bit, and it's not offensive, but it's just pretty obvious. And it turns into kind of a generic essay at that point. So this authenticity is what you're striving for. And in my opinion, this factor is the reason that personal statements need to take months to write. And I am not overstating. It should take, in my opinion, months to write personal statements because this authenticity takes that long to kind of develop and evolve over your variations of your personal statement. And there are times where, this person happened to me personally, where I wrote something that I thought was very personal and authentic and genuine, and it did not receive good feedback from the people whose opinions I respected. And this is something one of my English teachers referred to as killing your babies. And it really just means you've created this work of literature that is, your baby. And at sometimes you have to stop that, realize that is not going to get you the successful personal statement that you're interested in. Stop that and start with a new track. And that is the reason that this takes, in my opinion, months to really make a good personal statement. So some things that can enhance your storytelling or this narrative ability of your personal statement is showing, not telling, which comes through especially in vivid details. So some recommendations and tips that I give to my clients or students that I work with in writing personal statements are, how specific can you be? How vivid can you be? I want my favorite way to start a personal statement, I would first of all recommend not using quotes. But secondly, my favorite way to start a personal statement is the most vivid childhood or high school or middle school memory that you can conjure up that had anything to do with your interest, passion, desire to pursue this field. And it doesn't even have to be a medical story. So my story personally was about a scab on my knee that I picked after playing softball one day at dinner. And it was the most vivid scene I could imagine. And I, long story short, ended up making that a metaphor for whatever, my career in medicine. But the point is, I, as a reviewer, want to be able to see the detail that you are trying to describe to me. So make it as vivid as possible when you're telling stories or showing me, experiences that you've had. And then emotions matter. And I will say that this is a little bit of a fine balance. So as much as I'm saying, I want to hear about you, I want to hear your story, and I want the details, that is all true. At the same time, this doesn't need to be some poetic literary work. It should be a story about you, give me some context and some understanding about who you are as a person and your authenticity and genuine kind of experiences. But at the same time, it doesn't need to be some tearjerker or something that doesn't need to be so personal that it makes me potentially as a reader uncomfortable. Nothing like that. But emotions matter, and we do want to hear your passion, and we do want to hear how these experiences changed and moved you and helped you grow as a person, and how they perhaps guided you to the career path that you decided on here in medicine. So it is a little bit of a balance, I would say. If you can bring some emotion and passion and feeling into it in a way that is, appropriate and professional for the setting, then that is really going to strengthen your personal statement as well. So some things that can go wrong that can kind of weaken your essay. We talked about red flag things, which are topics or things that are controversial, things that make the reader feel uncomfortable, perhaps too personal. That can happen. Avoid the red flag things, but here are some other things that can kind of weaken a pretty good or otherwise reasonable personal statement. Overloading with accomplishments. So I talked about earlier, this should not be a retelling of your CV. Really try to stay away from that. And in fact, it really makes me not as interested if I'm just reading a paragraph about a thing that you did and I don't get to hear anything more about you personally or how it changed you or how it helped you. We talked about writing in a way that is very generic or too polished. If it sounds like ChatGPT wrote it or it's an overly academic paper, not that interested. This is a personal statement. It should be personal to some degree. We talked about telling instead of showing. So this is just you're listing a thing that you did, describing even in detail how, like, the experience, the role you played in this experience. Not that helpful for me to understand who you are as a person. So try to avoid that. And then linking your experiences that you do tell in the story or the narrative and the statement, forgetting to link those to personal growth and development, as well as to future goals, how that is going to make you a good medical student, how that's going to make you a good physician. Really what we're trying to identify here we're trying to identify the passion for medicine, which everyone has, but we're trying to identify the driving force that is going to propel you through this very challenging journey of medical school and then residency, potentially fellowship, and then, being a physician. It's a long, challenging path, and we want to try to identify those folks that have a propelling or driving motivational force to get through all of the challenges with training. I would also say, add to this list, it seems obvious and almost like it doesn't need to be said, but spelling and grammar errors really take me, even if the rest of your personal statement is stunning, spelling and grammar errors take me out of the experience a bit, because it shows a lack of attention to detail, lack of organization, that are just things that ideally we don't have in applicants that we're really advocating for. So just be really cautious of that. Read it 1,000 times, send it to everyone that you care about in terms of their respective writing and professionalism, and get their feedback as well. But just making sure we're checking for obvious spelling or grammar errors. So other ways to other factors in telling your story effectively. So we talked about already, but just in more detail, highlighting growth and reflection on your experiences. So more than listing things that you've done or even how you got here, I want to know how those experiences impacted you, how it changed your perspective, how you felt it developed characteristics in you that are going to make you a successful physician, or helped you understand patients' point of view, or the struggles and barriers that they face in obtaining access to healthcare. Something that tells me like you have some insight and some reflection. Also, so connecting the dots, not just telling me like, here is me, here's what I've been through. That's helpful. That is certainly a part of your personal statement, but also how that journey has prepared you for what you're applying for in the field of medicine. And then this is, in my opinion, and I use the word narrative kind of purposefully here, this is in some way a story, and that each paragraph should really lead into the next. So my kind of template that I like is, whatever kind of interesting, unique starter that you want for your first paragraph. And then the next few should be, in my mind, it's really helpful as a reviewer to make the next few almost chronological in terms of, this initial event piqued my interest, and that kind of forced me or encouraged me or drove me to pursue this experience. So maybe that's a volunteering or a clinical work opportunity or a research experience. And once I was in, for example, this research experience, it really showed me this avenue towards medicine, in which I then became involved in shadowing the PI or shadowing this professor or whatever it may be in medicine, which and then give me your introspection and your reflection components, which helped me decipher that this was the field for me because yada yada, and then tie it back again to your initial kind of whatever your kind of catches at the beginning, tie it back in the end, and tie in those experiences with how these are going to make you, these have developed these traits in you that will make you a good physician and or medical student. Avoiding cliches. So this there's a couple points here. And the first is, mine is just, I avoid quotes as your topic, paragraph, starting sentence. That is just, in my opinion, in terms of writing, pretty cliche. It's just done a lot, and we see the same quotes kind of over and over again because they're meaningful. But just, I would consider that to be something that a lot of people do, and for that reason doesn't really separate you as an applicant. There are a number of overused phrases that really don't mean a lot because they apply to so many people. So things like, I've wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. I just want to, I have this drive to help people. Everyone that is in your group of applicants has that feeling. Maybe not like I've wanted to be a doctor as long as I can remember, but I just want to help people. I just like helping people. Like, there are a lot of fields that use science to help people. And so that doesn't really help me differentiate you as an applicant or you as a medical school applicant, as opposed to nursing or, any other kind of healthcare field. So that is important, because really what we're trying to deduce here and what you're trying to convey as an applicant is why this is the right field for you, why you are so well suited to do this thing. And that requires that you do some introspection and come to some conclusions that are uniquely yours. And then instead of using like broad statements that you think are easy to palate say, I really want you to try to use personal experiences and personal statements and in vivid detail, if necessary, to explain and showcase your motivations, your values, your characteristics, and your desires. And that will really come across as a more genuine and authentic kind of personal statement. The other thing I'll say here, and I think it comes up again in some later slides, but avoid fluff. So there are some times where I read personal statements and there are just filler sentences that I'm not sure what the purpose is. It's really just to like support what they think that I want to read. I would just avoid the fluff altogether. If it doesn't contribute to you, like helping me understand you better, if it doesn't feel like something that only you could say or to generate, then, perhaps that needs to be cut or edited further. So some final touches that make a difference. Reading your statement aloud is actually so much more helpful than it might seem. So reading your statement aloud multiple times, this allows you to catch awkward phrasing or awkward or inadvertent stops in the flow of your narrative. So sometimes when we're reading, especially when we're reading a passage that we've read 1,000 times because we wrote it, because we've been working on it for 6 months, we don't catch this kind of awkward phrasing. But someone who hasn't looked at it for the last 3 months may catch it, and it might slow them down in their appreciation of your statement. So read things out loud. This, in my opinion, goes hand in hand with send this to people whose opinion you respect in terms of the professional world that you're going into. So a lot of times it's a professor or a research PI or a position you're shadowing. It's totally appropriate and appreciated to send that to students and just say, do you mind looking through it and just making sure it makes sense to you? Or if anything stands out in a good or bad way, please let me know. And now, just because you receive feedback does not mean you have to utilize it. But if you get the same feedback a couple of times, it's a good indicator that something needs to be changed or that you're doing something right. So I would highly recommend you seek feedback. Of course, as Inspire counselors, this is like what we do, and go through with our applicants like over and over again, tons of edits. But if you have someone in your life that you trust to help you with that, then certainly you should reach out for feedback from them. We talked about the other bullet point, making sure every sentence adds value that contributes to your core narrative and your core message, and really is individual to you. And then we talked about proofreading and grammar and spell checks, obviously. So how do you make yours stand out when we're reviewing, hundreds of applications? So the start is really important. Like I said, in my opinion, no quotes. This can be done well, but rarely. In my opinion, no quotes. In my opinion, the start should be something that is your memory. Like, that's the best way that I've read. It doesn't have to be, but that's one of the best techniques that I've seen, is your memory. Put me in there. Let me take a walk around. Let me look around in your memory. Make it vivid for me. And it kind of sets the tone of how you're going to write, like what your literary style is. And then it doesn't need to be, I keep saying narrative. It doesn't need to be a chapter in a book. It can be short and sweet. And in fact, the shortest way you can convey your points is better. So that usually means removing fluff, removing extra sentences that don't add to your narrative, don't contribute to the story you're trying to tell, don't help me understand you better as an applicant. So keep it as short as you can to still convey the points you're interested in conveying. I usually say no longer than a page, certainly. And then end with impact. Usually for me, when I'm either writing or helping applicants, this means somehow bringing back your opening paragraph, somehow relating this opening paragraph that's starting strong, somehow bring that back in and tell me how that sees you through every paragraph. That maybe I put that together, maybe I didn't, but that should be kind of, your closing should summarize and kind of tie everything together. And not to mention, obviously, try to leave some kind of lasting impression on the takeaway points that you'd like reviewers to remember or take away from your statement specifically.
Amazing. So I'd love to just do a quick check-in with our audience. So to our audience, if you have any questions thus far, I know we have a few more slides before the Q&A. Please take a minute, just put those in the chat. I think we can answer a few of them prior to the next slides. And then just as a thank you, we wanted for having us, because we absolutely love doing this and we appreciate everyone taking the time tonight to sit with us and learn and be part of this discussion. We wanted to offer you a 10% off any one of our wonderful programs with the code 10OFFWEB. And then the QR code actually just leads you back to a page where you're able to book a free consultation if you were considering admissions counseling or maybe some sort of tutoring, or if you just had a question about your application specifically. Again, we will try and answer as many questions in the Q&A, but if we can't, we want to make sure that we make that resource available to you as well. Katie, I don't see any questions in the chat thus far, but I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to get those in. And I'd love to kind of bring you back and ask you, when somebody's beginning this process and they don't know where to start, how can they start brainstorming potential, narrative topics? Where do they start? What is the beginning of this journey? Because evidently it's a lot to go through.
Yeah. And like I said, when I am helping folks through it, I recommend that they spend a lot more time than perhaps they appreciate initially on this process, because the brainstorming part takes a lot of time and feels kind of unfulfilling because you don't leave with like a composed paragraph or anything like that. But my preference for brainstorming could be a couple of things. Sometimes when I'm actually doing this right now for fellowship, sometimes when I'm writing, I just try to think of what is a vivid memory that I have, not necessarily related to medicine, not necessarily related to whatever. What is a couple of vivid memories that I have? And I start jotting those down. Sometimes they work as like metaphors that I can tie as a thread through my application. Sometimes they don't, and they won't all be fruitful. But sometimes I think of just what are a couple vivid memories to get me started? Is there any way I could kind of use it as a metaphor for my journey? So I'll just give you the example of my medical school one, and this is for residency. And it's a little weird, and I got that a couple of times as a comment, but in a good way, in a way that stuck with my reviewers. So like I said, I was, picking a scab at the dinner table or something gross. And it was from playing softball. And I have this vivid memory of me sitting at the dinner table. And I go through my journey. And towards the end, when I wrap it up, I relate this, like, once I've gone through this journey and the scab is, off, it reveals this like fresh, healthy pink skin underneath. And that is the doctor that I want to be, which is, this compassionate, thoughtful, whatever. And so somehow you can find a metaphor in some vivid memories that you have. Other brainstorming options that I've advised to clients are, first of all, you can just make a list of your experiences just to have them to look at. But also you should make a list of the characteristics, the few, handful or less characteristics that you are trying to demonstrate to reviewers. So what is it that you want them to take away from this? And then once you've got a list of your characteristics that you'd like, which it should be a pretty short list, they're the things that are most valuable to you, that make you who you are, that are core values for you, and happen to be core values for what make a good physician. Once you've got the two lists in front of you, experiences that you've gone through and pursued, and the list of values and characteristics you want to demonstrate, how do those link up together? How can I demonstrate these characteristics through these experiences? And usually that you can find one or two or even three experiences that demonstrate the values you're hoping to, or that cultivated the values you're hoping to demonstrate, and start working those into paragraphs. Maybe start by explaining the experiences, how they kind of led into one another, and how they brought you to this point. And like I said, this is going to take a lot of iterations. I strongly recommend that you give this enough time so that you can work on things for a while, brainstorm, start writing just jotting down whatever thoughts kind of come across your mind, and then take time away from it and revisit it a week later. Different, like fresh eyes with different experiences and time between them will kind of give you new insights as to, whether you like or dislike parts of your writing, or if something else needs to be added or retracted. So give it enough time that you can take breaks away and come back.
Thank you for that. In terms of just personal statements, or maybe let's just open this up to applications you've seen. Are there any that stood out to you, like something that you could share with our audience that just sticks out?
Yeah, there are so many, actually. And really all of the personal statements or application writing that has stuck with me as a reviewer is specific to that person. No one else that I will meet or will review will have the story that I'm reading. I don't want to talk too personally about other people's applications, but for example, one of them that I'm thinking off the top of my head, I just reviewed this last week for residency, was talking about, and no one else will have this, and that's kind of the point, talking about this person was a Syrian refugee, and talking about I don't want to be too personal, experiencing some components of war and violence and trauma in their village. And so they were able to set a scene for me in which they experienced something very specific to their life. And it does not in any way, that's just the first one off the top of my head, does not have to be traumatic. In fact, most are not. And it's often easier to talk about something that is personal, but not, so emotionally charged, but just something that you have been through. And so I've read a few recently that were related to perhaps a sports scene. One I'm thinking of is describing a loss of a team sport event in high school, things like that. So it doesn't have to be, in fact, usually isn't medical, doesn't have to be medical or anything like that. One thing I'll say about being these specific experiences and not being cliche is that what I do see a lot, and this is more like a what not to do, I suppose, but what I do see a lot is starting with like an opening scene of like your parent or a loved one that is in the hospital. I, as a reviewer, absolutely can understand that that was probably impactful and meaningful to you in your life as an applicant, but it is just something that is so common that I would try and avoid that if possible, unless you can give me a new take on it. So unless it's not just like, so the thing that we see very, very commonly is my parent or loved one was diagnosed with a thing. Usually it's like cancer or something unfortunate and very, very meaningful, obviously, to the applicant, but just something like that. Was diagnosed with a cancer. And I was with them through all of their appointments and their treatments, and the relationship that the physician had with my parent or a loved one was really meaningful to me, and it made me want to pursue kind of this path, something along those lines. And like I said, I don't mean to belittle or belittle that experience at all, but it is just a common kind of story or experience that we hear. And so if you can give that story to me in a way that is unique and different and specific to you, then give it to me. If not, I would try and perhaps pick a different experience to kind of demonstrate.
Thanks, Katie.
Yes.
We have one more question in the chat, but I think we can continue on with the presentation and then come back to questions as well.
Okay. I only have, I think, 2 more slides or something like that, or a few more slides.
Okay.
So we'll get to that question shortly. Just to keep moving through, other ways to bring your voice to life or really demonstrate yourself through your writing. I think writing how you speak is lovely. It does have to be a professional kind of more polished tone than, of course, how you speak colloquially, how I would speak just on a day-to-day basis. But I love when I can hear the writer's kind of thought or speech patterns in the writing. Now, that doesn't mean you should, use poor grammar or anything like that. But there are ways to convey your specific speech kind of patterns in your writing in a way that is still professional but unique to you. Try to do that if you can. Using intentional sentence structure. This really is just, again, making sure that your sentences that you are using and the words you're using within them are meaningful and contribute to your story and the message you're trying to convey. And then this is one thing that I find applicants have a really hard time with, and it's balancing humility with advocating for yourself. So the point of this personal statement and your application as a whole is to advocate for yourself. I am a good applicant and I have these characteristics that make me well suited for this field. And you absolutely need to convey those things and find a way to demonstrate those things through your stories and through your experiences. However, it needs to be balanced with humility. You are a good applicant. You do have these qualities. However, how did you cultivate those? Well, they were through other people, right? They were through, who you are, the culmination of who you are, and all of your skills and attributes. They are yours, but they were cultivated through experiences that were contributed to by other people. So there has to be this. You're also very early on in the process. So you're a great applicant. People that are applying to medical school are in the top, 1 or 2% of like achievers in the country. So you are that, but you are also still so early in the process. So that humility needs to come into, and walking this fine line of advocating for yourself and advertising yourself, but also understanding that you still have so much to learn and experience and appreciate about both the world, because you're a young human, as am I think, still, and this field in general for medicine. So those are the 2 things that you're trying to balance here. Certainly don't undersell yourself. There's no reason to make your personal statement make me question your qualifications. Not that I would, but at the same time, balance that with, like, I cannot wait to continue to learn about this field and deepen my passions and interests in research or whatever it may be. So trying to balance those 2 things is critical. And then polishing your statement, finishing kind of touches, refining your message. This is just making sure that your statement is clear, has a clear thread through from start to finish. Each paragraph has transitions nicely into the next. There's no abrupt change in topic or theme. That your opening paragraph relates to every other paragraph in some way. Every paragraph relates to itself or to each other and to your story and contributes to the message you're trying to tell. Spelling and grammar checks we already talked about. And then reducing anything that doesn't contribute to that message. I think those are all of our content slides. Andrea?
Absolutely, then. Before we go into the Q&A, we have about 15 minutes left. I think that's a very healthy amount of time. We'd love to hear from you. There's obviously a survey, and I was telling Katie this earlier. We absolutely love hearing feedback about your experiences with us. So if there's anything we can improve on, if there's anything we did well, if there's anything we could do to improve in the future and offer better guidance, we take all that information back and we just continue to better our future sessions and better ourselves and just make sure that we're having the most impact and providing you the most value possible. So we would really appreciate that. If you don't want to do it now, you will get a follow-up, and we would recommend, or we would hope you would spend a minute or two just giving us that feedback back. With that being said, I'd love to hop in right into the Q&A. So one of the questions we already answered. There is another question, and then we just recommend if you'd like to actually speak, just let us know and we can unmute you as well. So somebody asked us, is it okay to give many anecdotes?
I haven't seen this before in my experience, and I haven't seen it done well. That's not to say it couldn't be done well, but generally many anecdotes, if they don't have a theme connecting them, would be disjointed and perhaps distracting. If you have a number of anecdotes that perhaps potentially have a theme that ties them, and you're somehow going to like loop me in at the end about how all these things fit together and why they convey you perfectly, I could see a way in which it could be done well. I would just be careful that they don't come across kind of, like I said, disjointed and or distracting from the main core message you're trying to convey. Generally, 1 or 2 personal stories at the most are sufficient to kind of put me in the context to understand the story you're about to tell me. But, that's not to say, like I said at the beginning, it's not to say there's only one right way to do this. There's plenty of right ways to do this that are potentially different than anything I've said tonight. So that I don't want to discourage you. If you've got a vision for it, go for it. But make sure it hits all the other points that we talked about tonight, conveys, a clear and concise kind of theme about, and tells me, genuinely allows me to understand who you are as an applicant and why you are so well suited for this career and how you got here and all of that. So as long as it kind of meets all the other criteria, I could be okay with it, but just make sure it flows too. But yeah, try it out. What I would recommend is try it out, brainstorm it, start jotting some stuff down and see if it flows and accomplishes all the other criteria that we're hoping to meet with our personal statement.
So I actually have a follow-up question. I know we didn't necessarily talk about this in tonight's session, but I think our viewers might be thinking about this as well. How can we, so now speaking about the narrative from an application standpoint, how do we ensure that there's a flow from everything from the personal statement, the secondaries, to even your CV and what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a great point, Andrea. So we've only really been talking about personal statement design and writing and flow tonight. But this is a great point that really you have to also consider how your personal statement fits into the whole application. Because, really, if I look at your application, and I think I've got a good idea of your experiences, and then I read your personal statement and they don't really align with all the experiences that you've sought out, can be a little jarring as a reviewer. If your application you've got a scribe job and some volunteer activities in pediatrics and I don't know, I'm just making something up, but something like that. You've got some experiences that line up with one thing, and then your personal statement is about how you want to be an orthopedic surgeon or something, I don't know, geriatrics, something completely different, or doesn't really talk to the rest of the application. That can be a little jarring and can look like perhaps that you as an applicant may not have a very clear vision for what got you into the field and what you're hoping to do in the future. And like doesn't help me understand, what that driving motivational force would be that we talked about before. So really, like, you want to make sure that the personal statement fits in the context of the rest of your application in order to create a narrative for that. And by create, I really don't mean, we're not fabricating anything here. These are all experiences that you have, but really you just, like I said, you want to, your primary application and all the experiences you're describing and your meaningful activities and all of that should not repeat, but should relate to your personal statement. They should kind of work hand in hand to help me understand you better and why you've pursued each of these experiences.
Sorry, it took me a second to mute myself. I don't see any questions in the chat, but again, we want to make sure that this is really your time to chit chat with Katie, get your questions answered, whether it be about, your personal statement, whether that be your resume, whether it be your application. I'll give you a moment because I know we just gave you a ton of information. But Katie, do you want to chat a little bit more about maybe just applications in general, any sort of information? I know tonight we're focusing on the narrative, but just helpful tidbits, pieces of advice that you can give about the application process.
Sure. So I don't know, for the people that are in attendance, I don't know, I guess, where you are in the process. But in general, just the layout of the application process. There's a primary application in which you kind of put all of your grades and scores, as well as your experiences, clinical work experiences, volunteering, shadowing, research, all of these things. You kind of put that all in. You're given a few opportunities to discuss meaningful activities for you. Of course, your personal statement, your CV, your letters of recommendation. And we have webinars on kind of all of these things separately, but really each of these steps is important to try to optimize in order to have a successful application cycle. Of course, unfortunately, your MCAT and GPA, whether it's right or wrong, unfortunately weigh heavily on your application just because they're some of the few objective measures that we have. So that's your primary application. You put all these pieces together. You've optimized each one ideally. And once you submit that, you generally, from pretty much all of the schools you apply to, will receive a secondary application. There are a few schools that have kind of filtering thresholds, but for the most part, places you apply with your primary, you'll get a secondary from. Secondary applications are basically somewhere between 2 and 6 short essay prompts that are school specific. These are to get a feel for if you would be a good fit for that specific school, not necessarily like if you'd be a good doctor or a good med student. And those you will turn back in basically as soon as you can. And then we would wait for, meaning like me and my clients, when we do this together, wait for interviews. And the whole time you can be preparing for interviews, you can be pre-writing your secondaries, because I guess what I would like to say is the main tip for this whole process and every piece of this process is timeliness. So submitting your applications, whether that be your primary, secondary, or signing up for interviews, whatever it may be, this whole process is generally based on a rolling admission status, which basically means the sooner you can get this information in, submit your applications, return prompts, whatever it may be, the sooner you can do that, the sooner your application is viewed, and the higher statistical likelihood that you will be push forward to the next step, whether that be interviews or acceptance. So the timeliness and the timing of your application matters so much in this process, and really does a lot to augment the likelihood of you being accepted. And so there's a lot of stuff online that you can look for in terms of organization and timing for that. But obviously that's something that we offer, is the organizational component to that I would be happy to help with. But just making sure you leave yourself enough time to do each of these steps well and thoroughly and efficiently is I would say the biggest part of the application process.
And how far in advance should individuals be starting to prep?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question. All of your experience, all of your experiences really come from your whole, all of the years of college leading up to your application. If you're a non-traditional applicant, even the years intervening between college and your application, whatever it may be. So all of those things are really in preparation for this application. In terms of like sitting down and doing dedicated application prep, I think, in my opinion, the personal statement should take between 3 and 6 months for edits, revisions, starting over, whatever it may be. Your MCAT, generally we recommend that you take it. So generally primary applications can be turned in towards the end of May / beginning of June. This year it's May 28th. So your MCAT should be back in time for you to have the score, which informs which schools you'll apply to. Back in time, so the latest is usually March we would recommend. It takes about 6 weeks to get your score back, and that needs to be done in time for you to make decisions, but also in case you need a retake. So all of this buffer time gets built in. I mean, I think the minimum amount of time for us like starting to think about application prep stuff is about 6 months, and that's just dedicated time on like writing and preparing. The application's generally open for you to start actually filling in things on usually like a month ahead of time before you can submit.
Amazing. Katie, thanks for answering all the questions, and thanks for being with us tonight. I don't necessarily see any more questions in the chat, so I think this is a really great place to wrap up tonight's discussion. Again, thank you for being here. LSU, thanks for having us. We were so excited when this opportunity came up, and we want to hear from you. So if you'd like another webinar, if you have any questions, even later on, you have our emails, please drop us a note. We want to make sure that if we don't know the answer, we will find the answer for you. So rest assured, we have your back throughout this entire process, even down the line.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.